it is actually, there we go. It refers to the dried flowers of the cannabis plant, and there are two different, what we used to call strands of marijuana, but now they're actually, and this is something that I just learned this morning, they're using the term chemovars instead of strands, because there's different chemical varieties, right? So we know that cannabis sativa and cannabis indica are the two strands, or chemovars, it sounds like they're saying, that they refer to. But in addition to that, with everything else that has progressed, we also know that there are tons of different hybrids that have been created. There are scientists whose sole purpose is looking at this plant and figuring out different ways of making it stronger, higher in THC versus CBD, and making it, have an impact in different ways. So again, lots of hybrids. When it comes to the sativa plant, they and the difference between the sativa and the indica is basically that one is used for energizing, which is the sativa, and the indica is more for relaxation purposes. So depending on what effect you want, that'll kind of determine what strand you use. They do look a little bit differently, with the sativa plant being long, thin blades, where the indica plant is wider, kind of shorter blades off of the plant itself. But the cannabis plant contains more than 100 different compounds and 500 different chemicals that they have identified. Okay. As with anything else, I think it's also going to really depend on how the plant is grown, what other things are added to it as it's grown, that could increase those number of chemicals that you might be able to detect. When we talk about compounds, though, we look at two very specifically, the CBD, which is a part of it that is not mind altering, and then THC, which is the mind altering substance that gives you that high. When we talk about how many people use marijuana, again, the most recent stats that I was able to find is we do know that it is the most commonly used illicit drug in the United States. When in 2021, there was a survey that was done by the National Drug Use and Health, and National Survey on Drug Use and Health. They asked 12 years old and older, and it ended up being about 52.5 million people reported using cannabis in the last 12 months. There are some additional statistics that would lead me to believe that that number is much higher. And again, it's always that question: when was it actually asked? So the results are coming out in 2021, where the questions asked in 2020. And we know that since COVID has happened, COVID had a major impact in our world of substance use. We know that our alcohol rates have increased, and I do believe that if we were to really take a look at statistics before and after, you can probably directly relate our increase in marijuana use a little bit to COVID. All right. So my first question, as I said, I'm going to ask a lot of questions of you. Give me an idea what you think percentage wise of high school seniors that used marijuana in the last 12 months during 2020. Thoughts? Tracy, you unmuted, so I'm going to ask you first.
I'm just going to throw out a number. I have no idea. I'm just helping you out here, Kim. 40%.
40%. Great guess. Any other thoughts?
I said like 50.
Go ahead, Rochelle. You came up first, then we'll move to Rachel.
I would say about 50. I was make a guess.
Okay, Rachel.
I would say 3 out of 10. I think I saw.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So you're looking at about 30.7% of high school seniors used within the last 12 months during the year of 2022. Okay. How many of those high school seniors used marijuana on a daily basis in 2022?
That I don't know.
Okay. I appreciate the honesty. Thanks. Any thoughts from anyone?
22.
22%, okay.
I'll go with half. So half of the ones that used it probably use it daily.
Okay, so about 16%, okay. So interestingly enough, the daily use is about 6.3%. So not nearly as high as I was expecting it to be. And again, like I said, this is one survey, right? We in the United States really rely on a great number of different surveys. And I don't know how many of you have heard about the Monitoring the Future survey, but it has been in existence for decades. The research goes back a very long time. And that is one that we refer to often, especially in our prevention world, like the world that I am in. We use the Monitoring the Future survey quite a bit. We also use a survey called the Pennsylvania Youth Survey. And there are a large number of the schools in Beaver County who do participate in the PAYS surveys. That will actually be taking place. It takes place every other year. And it follows the same kids from 6th grade basically through their 12th grade year in high school. And that is another one that we look at quite a bit when it comes to this. So I will send you some information. I was waiting to get a little bit more information from the PAYS, the most recent PAYS data. But where we stand in Beaver County in regards to national, even states, the last one that I looked at, I'm going to put an asterisk by this, but the last one that I looked at, we were above state level with our use of marijuana, and specifically in grades 8 and 10. That seems to be our area of concern. Those 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade years. And so again, that one was conducted during COVID. And so it'll be interesting to see where our stats are this year once the survey is done, and we have a chance to kind of look at that and kind of break that down a little bit more. But that is something that is available if you are interested in seeing either one of those. The PAYS data can be found on the state website, that you can look at that, and you can look at Beaver County data as a whole. You can actually look at any county. So if you work in multiple counties, that is available for you to look at. So when we talk about how marijuana is used, we know that it is used in many, many different ways in comparison to, let's say, the 1970s, right? The use of joints and blunts. So again, I'm sure you do know this, but a blunt is a cigar that's emptied out and filled, or just, cigar paper, tobacco leaves used to fill a much larger cigar. We have the bongs, we have the vapes. Over here, we have the tinctures that are used. And then we've seen the increase in edibles. And then this is what they would consider to be, it's called shatter. And that would be considered a high potency dab. Okay. This is the two areas that I would like to kind of spend a little bit of time on, in addition to the vaping. But we are also seeing an increase in the use of teas and coffees. If you type in, even being able to find, K-cups for your Keurig, available. So anything that you can imagine is now available to use with either CBD or THC levels in there. When it comes to edibles and the use of the high potency marijuana, we know that the high potency marijuana used in the dabs is where we are finding more of the psychotic episodes happening. And we're going to get into a little bit more about the THC levels in there. But these two areas are where we are seeing the majority of our youth using. Okay, so either in the vaping products, which is, this picture right here, the edibles, or the high potency dabs, or, different products like that. I'm not saying that they're still not using joints or bowls or anything like that. They're still using that. But when you talk to the younger people and you ask them what marijuana looks like to them, right? What do you think that they're answering? And compared to those of us who are on this call, when you think of the word marijuana, what is it that you visualize when you think that word or hear that word? Is it this?
I'll be old. Fine. 1 and 5. Picture number 1 and 5.
Okay,
I agree.
right. Right. And that's kind of where we are. And yeah, I say this all the time. I'm dating myself, but when I hear the word marijuana, I still visualize the first time I ever walked into, and actually this gives you in college, when I walked into a friend who was separating his weed from the seeds to what he could smoke, right? He was making sure there were no seeds in it. This is what, when I hear the word marijuana, this is what I visually, in my mental state, this is what I see. But when we talk to our youth, this is what they see, this is what they see, and this is what they see, right? So it's the edibles, it's the vapes, and it's this high potency THC. It's no longer what I like to refer as the dirt pot. Like you just picked it, you dried it, and you smoked it, right? That's what I call dirt pot. That is not what they visualize. It is the edibles, it's the vapes, and it's that. So it is a different mentality. Our youth have a different mentality when it comes to marijuana than the rest of us did. Okay. And we will explore that a little bit more. So again, I have another set of questions. How long does it take to feel the effects of marijuana when it is smoked? So smoking marijuana in, like I said, the dirt pot, or even through vaporizing it, about how quickly do you feel the effects?
Maybe like 2 minutes.
Okay,
Minute?
2 minutes. Great guess. Thanks. Any other thoughts?
Seconds.
Right. Yeah. So, and you would think that's Maria, like a good guess for sure, because it seems to be instantaneous, but it is more around that 3 to 5 minute range is kind of where we are when it is smoked. So roughly 3 to 5 minutes. And, for young adults who are used to that immediate satisfaction of anything, like, so they Google something and within literal seconds they have an answer. If they want to find out absolutely our youth of today, they want instantaneous information, right? And so that 3 to 5 minutes might seem like a whole lot of time to them, but in actuality that is a quick turnaround, right? From mouth to lungs to brain, to be able to, to feel the effects. So the bonus question is, how long will it take the body to feel the effects of marijuana when it's ingested? So let's look at that idea of the teas, the tinctures, the specifically the edibles.
So usually, if I remember correctly, it's about 1 hour generally, but sometimes it could be up to 2 hours.
Okay.
So like 1 to 2 hours.
Great. I love it. Thanks, Brian. Any other thoughts? So Brian is very close. Depending on the potency of whatever it is that they consume, it can take as little as 30 minutes to feel those effects and up to 60 minutes. If it is a very low potency, it could take much longer for that to happen, right? Because what does the body have to do? It's a lot different whenever you smoke it, because it's easily put through the system. It hits that bloodstream through the lungs very quickly. When you ingest it, your body has to break it down. So it has to go through the stomach and do all of these things, right, before it hits that bloodstream. So it is going to take a lot longer. So another question that I have for you is, what do you think happens when our young people consume marijuana in that manner, when they ingest it versus smoking it? Do you think there is a difference in how they act and how they behave when the effects aren't felt immediately? What do
Oh,
you
they
think?
just take,
Go ahead, Rachel.
they eat more.
Right. They absolutely eat more. And the one thing that we know about edibles, and the thing that's very important to realize, is that when it comes to edibles, serving size is key. So how many of you like gummy bears? How many? I mean, a lot of us like gummy things, right? Do any of you eat just the head of one gummy and then put it down? Rachel, I'm going to say no, that you are like me and do not do that, right? And it's the same thing when it comes to the edibles. When it comes to the serving size, it literally could be that you're only eating half of a gummy bear. They have very similar layouts to like, if you can imagine a Hershey bar, and the Hershey bar is broken down not only into like the bigger blocks, but then smaller rectangular blocks inside of the Hershey, right? If you were to look at some of the serving sizes when it comes to a Hershey bar type, it may only be one of those small squares. So again, when you're making a s'more, do you use only one of those small rectangular things? No, you break off half of it and you throw it on the thing, right? And so when it comes to that idea of using edibles, when they are in the a similar product of a candy, the brain looks at that like, it's candy, I'll take half of it, right? Until they get used to figuring it out and all of this stuff. So it's really important to keep in mind when it comes to edibles, there is such a thing as serving sizes, and paying attention to that. When they don't get the immediate response that they think they're going to get, like Rachel said, they will continue to take them. So when they continue to add layers on, that is when we get to a point of like a toxic level within the system. Okay. We have seen an increase in the number of emergency room visits for people who are over consuming and have a toxic level of marijuana in their system. Okay. And it definitely relates back to those edibles. So we know regardless of how marijuana is consumed, it can have a profound impact on the brain. All right. I am not a scientist. I am not a biologist. I am not a doctor. Okay. But this is the way that the brain communicates with itself. We literally have hundreds of billions of neurons in our brain that helps to communicate and transfer messages throughout. Okay. So these nerve cells work nonstop to send and receive messages. Within the neuron, the message travels from the neuron down the axis and into this little section right here. Okay. Whatever that message is, this section reads it and determines what neurotransmitter gets released. Okay. The neurotransmitter will get released into this little blank area between the two receptors, and this receptor will pick up the message. That's how our brain works normally. Can I ask Brian, what do you enjoy doing outside of, work is, I'm sure.
Work is my life. It's
Yes.
my only happiness.
That's
No.
right. We are all in that, and I'm glad we're all on the same page. But Brian, tell me something that you enjoy doing outside of work that brings you joy.
Running.
Running. I am so glad I picked you, Brian, right? Because there is such a thing as a runner's high. Have you experienced that runner's high before?
Oh, absolutely. It's great.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about that runner's high.
So runner's high is just kind of like this euphoric mindset that you just gradually find yourself entering as you go further, like with running, where like your whole body just feels connected. It feels like you can just keep going no matter how far you go. And honestly, it's kind of when the, what's it called? It's not endorphins, but or is it endorphins? I'm trying to think of the word.
Yep.
Yeah, when the endorphins kick in and just give you like that huge confidence boost. It's really cool.
Right. So, and that's something that happens naturally, right? So that is something that happens naturally within our body. So whether it's a runner's high, like my son is, he plays baseball. My daughter plays volleyball. You know, they experience something similar to that, and that's a natural thing that happens within our body. And when those receptors, whether it's endorphins or dopamine or whatever it might be, serotonin, whatever that endorphin, whatever that neurotransmitter gets released, it's picked up, right, and it is taken in, and that is sent throughout the body. Okay. And when it recognizes when it's time to kind of let that go, because Brian he's not running all the time, right? And so it happens when he's running. When he's done running, he may feel it for a little bit afterwards, but it's not something that lasts for days, right? It kind of has a shelf life to it. And that's the way the brain works, right? It wants to work as efficiently as possible. And this section right here is also like it's not only like the hub of activity in the conversations, but it works as a lock and key. So we have specific I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting the name, but we have specific parts of that will pick up specific communications and specific neurotransmitters. Okay, we all have different receptors on our brain. So we have nicotine receptors, we have opioid receptors, we also have endocannabinoid receptors. Okay, so when the body is doing these things naturally, it works really well. When we introduce any kind of drug to the system, whether we're talking THC, whether we're talking alcohol, tobacco, opioids, whatever it might be, what ends up happening is there's a mad rush and there's extra things that get released. When we are specifically talking about THC, we're talking about a mad rush of dopamine. And that is the high that people feel, right? And so what ends up happening is if they are someone who uses on a regular basis, the body will then recognize, hey, wait a minute, when my person does this, whether that's smoking it, ingesting it, whatever, I get this huge rush. I'm going to cut back on what I make naturally. Okay. And so when that happens, that's when the brain kind of recognizes, I'm going to wait for the drug to enter my system. I'm not going to do anything. And then if it doesn't get there, then I'll release a little bit, but I'm not going to release as much as I used to. Okay. So in essence, it kind of explains it a little bit more. And I'm going to move you guys over here. So THC acts on specific brain cell receptors that ordinarily react to natural THC-like chemicals. These natural chemicals play a role in normal brain development and function. And that looks like making sure that we remember things. So it's our mood, it's our memory, it's things like that. Marijuana overactivates these parts of the brain that contain the highest number of these receptors. And that's what causes the high that people feel. Okay. So again, that whole endocannabinoid system plays a role in all of this. And I was explaining to Kim, there is so much new information because the endocannabinoid system is something that actually is just relatively new. Not that it's new to, it's not like it all of a sudden showed up, but it's new to research and what they're starting to figure out about it. And so my goal would to be like either shadow someone or take some kind of intensive class because I want to learn more about this and how it all works. But in essence, like I said, when marijuana is smoked, it causes the brain to release those higher amounts of dopamine. And the more the brain releases when it's doing this, the less it's going to release when it is not present. And so that's when you have the people who become reliant on that feeling. And when they don't have it, have that kind of like the depressive states and things like that. When we talk about the areas of the brain that are affected, it really is going to depend on that person. It's going to just depend on what it is that they're using and how they're using it and the potency of what they're using. But there are several areas of the brain that have a major impact. So the hypothalamus controls the appetite, your hormone levels, and your sexual levels. So if the hypothalamus controls your appetite, in someone who smokes it, that is their part of the brain that has the major impact. What happens to that person? How can you tell that their hypothalamus is the part that gets impacted? What is their behavior?
I get the munchies.
They get the munchies, right? So that one's kind of easy to figure out. The other one that I always like to point out is the hippocampus, right? The hippocampus is our filing system in our brain, right? So literally everything that we do today, from me putting my hands together and moving them back and forth, to the number of times that I blink, to hearing the sound of my bracelets, kind of touch each other, that is all getting filed in that part of my brain. When I am in bed at night and my brain is still working, that's when the brain kind of figures out what's really important. Does it matter that I see Rachel or Rochelle sitting with a white curtain and a white lamp? Is that important for me to remember? Probably not. But the fact that I said that out loud is probably going to be something that sticks with me a little bit longer, right? But the hippocampus is the important part for like the memory, but learning facts and sequences. So when we talk about the idea of people, young people specifically, using marijuana, this is one of the areas of concern, right? They are still in the process of learning things in school. The earlier people are introduced to marijuana and start consuming it, the brain has the ability to kind of prune what is not being used. Have you heard of the use it or lose it? Have you guys heard of that before? Right? So if they don't use it, it will be pruned and it will be lost. That is why, as elementary school teachers, we're encouraged to introduce a second language in preschool and kindergarten, right? To get that part of the brain moving a little bit more, and getting it to be a little bit more malleable to learning something like that. Okay. So that's one of the reasons when we talk specifically about different areas of the brain, why we are concerned. Okay. So when marijuana is smoked, its active ingredient THC travels through the body, including the brain, to produce many of its effects. It attaches to the cannabinoid receptors on the nerve cells in the brain, affecting the way those cells work. These receptors are abundant in parts of the brain that regulate movement, coordination, learning, and memory, higher cognitive functions such as judgment and pleasure. So when we look at the brain as a whole, why is it important to discuss the impact of use in the adolescent years?
Because our brains don't stop developing until we're 25, and
Okay.
it can stunt their like cognitive growth.
Absolutely. So research for the longest time has indicated that 25-year-old mark is kind of where we are. And I will tell you that there have been, in many of the conferences and different things that I have attended recently, they're actually pushing that age back even further. So for females, it's moving towards an age of about 28 versus 25. And for males, it's actually looking closer to 32. I know Melissa's face just said it all to me, right? So there's still a lot of research happening that we, like I said, in our prevention world, that 25-year mark is kind of where we have been for years. But we do know that it is probably much closer to late 20s versus mid 20s. And when our brain grows, does anybody know how it grows? How it develops?
From the back to the front.
Right. And actually, it's a little bit more in this middle section, right? And it grows in like a backward C. So this part right here, which is the prefrontal cortex, that helps us make super sound decisions, right? So if Alexandra, if you were to say to me, hey, Kim, like, we're closing off this road. It's a 3-mile straight ahead. We're going back to the 60s, right? We're racing for pinks, right? You give me your title. If you win, I give you my title of my car if I win. but we have to race down this 3-mile stretch. Where in my brain is the ability to say, is this a good idea? Right? It's that prefrontal cortex. And that is the last part, again, right here. This is the last part of the brain that gets fully developed. Okay. So being able to make those sound decisions, taking that 10-second step back to say, is this the best approach? Is this the best thing that I could be doing? Okay. So our adolescents are already wired for risk. They're already pushing those boundaries. I don't know how many of you have teenagers. I currently have 3. And I will tell you that you will never know what my hair color actually is because I get it colored because of the gray, right? And it only has come on since they have turned to be teenagers. And it's one of those deals that they are already like, you look at them and you think to yourself, my Lord, like, what were you thinking? And the bottom line is their brain is not fully developed enough to be able to make those sound decisions, right? That's where we are with this. So when we talk about the introduction of any kind of substance, and I'm very serious when I say this even goes for tobacco, when tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, or any other kind of drug is introduced to their brain before it is fully developed, even before the age of 18, it can have a profound effect on what they are able to do. Because not only do we kind of stunt the growth, there is still not a lot of information about how long that impact can last. Is it a forever impact? Is it a temporary impact? They are still trying to figure that stuff out. Okay. But we do know that it can have an immediate impact in their brain. So when the brain works as efficiently as possible, like I said, it recognizes that release of dopamine when the drugs are in the system. It does not produce as much as it normally would when it becomes a repetitive use. Okay. And so that does have an effect on their mental health. When we talk about the idea of our young people, like I said earlier, they don't think of marijuana in the dirt pot way that those of us who are a little bit older see. They move automatically into that vaping. We know, and we have, I have seen confiscated vaping products in Beaver County. Those vaping products, any idea, give me a thought on where you are. What is the THC levels on some of those vaping products? The liquid marijuana, liquid THC.
97%.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Usually it's like 50 to 100 milligrams. Yeah.
Okay. So in some of the ones that were confiscated from the DA's office, they did some testing on those and they ranged anywhere to, I think the one was about 51% THC, and the highest concentrate was a lovely, and I should have put this picture in. I'm sorry that I didn't do that. But it's Captain Crunch, the character from Captain Crunch. And that's the flavor of the vape. But it was 97.8% THC. So nearly pure THC in there. So again, the question goes back to what is happening with that? How does that have a bigger impact on, what we're seeing? And we're going to get into those potencies again in a little bit. Okay. When people begin using marijuana as teenagers, the drug may impair thinking, memory, and learning functions and affect how the brain builds connections between the areas necessary for these functions. Research is still studying how long marijuana's effects can last and whether some changes may be permanent. And that is from the National Institute of Drug Abuse. Okay. So when we talk short-term and long-term effects of marijuana use, obviously, many of these we know, altered sense of time, altered, changes in mood, impaired body movement, inability to think quickly, and being able to solve problems quickly. We talked about the impaired memory. For some people, if they're taking higher doses, it could lead to hallucinations or delusions. But again, as you all know, and our, the purpose really of the Deer Mind 2 is the fact that with regular use of the high potency marijuana, we are looking at psychosis. If anybody has had an opportunity to hear Laura Stack present, Laura is from Colorado. Bless you, Brian. If you sneeze. If she is from Colorado, and her 20-year-old son was unfortunately lost to suicide during a psychotic moment, that they contribute to his use of high potency THC. Laura was at the town hall meeting a couple of years ago. And if you ever have an opportunity to hear her, I would highly encourage you to do that, because she really does a great job of explaining a little bit more about those high potency THC and exactly what it does. Some of the long-term things, we know that studies have determined that with regular use, you could lose up to 8 IQ points, which can have a profound effect on someone's future. Memory issues that are long-standing, breathing issues from lung damage, increased heart rates. How many of you have heard of the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome? Yes, a few. Okay. So what the hyperemesis syndrome is, for those of you who may not know about it, it is regular bouts of severe nausea and vomiting that occurs when people use marijuana, specifically, again, that high potency THC on a regular basis. And there was, I think it was on either Channel 11 or channel, so WPXI or this KDKA, of a local woman who was using medical marijuana because she thought it was, beneficial for her anxiety. And she started having the symptoms of hyperemesis. And initially they couldn't figure out what it was. So when they finally figured that out, it is now something that she is, educating other people about too. So the hyperemesis syndrome, again, is a relatively new kind of thing, but it is something to pay attention to. The biggest thing that I always say when I talk about marijuana specifically to parents is the fact that we are not dealing with the hippie pot of the 70s. We are nowhere near what that pot was. When we look at the THC levels in recreational cannabis starting in the 1960s, we were looking at less than 1%. So less than 1% THC. So my question to everybody is, how much pot did those hippies smoke? They smoked a lot of pot to get any kind of real effects from it. As the years have gone on, we have seen a major increase, but even as early as the early 2000s, we were only looking at like anywhere between a 5 at the highest 9% THC levels in the in the marijuana that people were using. As we have moved into the 2000s, we have seen our THC levels increase exponentially, right? When you look even on the streets, again, let's talk dirt pot, right? What you would roll up in a joint or smoke in a bowl or a bong. Even that right now at the highest amount that has been, has tested is 35%. Okay. So roughly 18 to 35% is what you would find on the streets today. When we again talk specifically about the marijuana that is being used in vapes, we are going anywhere between 50 to upwards of the high 90% range. So my question to you is, does this lead to addiction? How many of you say that marijuana is an addictive substance? Yeah. Okay. How many of you are not sure? How many of you say absolutely not, it is not?
So like it's tough because I know like I've heard it's been a mixed bag of like, is marijuana addictive? I think that people get addicted to the high that they feel, and therefore they and like when they need to start increasing that high, I think it's like it starts leading into like the stigma of it being a gateway drug. So then that's what leads people to start looking elsewhere for that deeper high, like that higher high. So I feel like rather than just calling it addictive, I feel like it's a little more niche in that it brings out your addictive qualities. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, I like the way that you said that. Yeah, that makes sense. Any other thoughts? I want to keep us close to our time. So we know that 30% of those who use marijuana will have some degree of a marijuana use disorder. If they start using marijuana before the age of 18, they are 4 to 7 times more likely to develop some kind of use disorder. Okay. Marijuana dependency again occurs when the brain adapts to those super high levels of the drug and reduces the production and sensitivity to the naturally occurring neurotransmitters. Over the past few years, specifically with the increase in the potency of THC climbing, it's 3 times more concentrated than even 25 years ago. So the higher the THC amount, the stronger the effect is on the brain. It is likely to contribute to increased rates of marijuana-related emergency room visits. And again, research is really leaning towards the fact that those higher potency is likely to relate to higher dependency. Okay. When we look at marijuana in our county coming to the county, to BCBH for assistance getting into some kind of treatment, marijuana is second on the list behind alcohol. That was one of their drugs of choice. Okay. And I can provide the exact numbers for, it was about a year ago that we were provided with them. So it is definitely something that people are starting to realize that they have a dependence towards. And so I do think that we are starting to see with the changes, some things happening. Genetics versus environment. If we are in an environment where people are using marijuana on the regular, what do you think that does to our outlook on marijuana?
Yeah, it becomes cultural. So,
It becomes
you know,
right. It becomes normalized, right? And the more that we are seeing the United States as a whole going towards legalization, it has become something that a lot of people don't recognize is still having some issues. We know that genetically, the disease of addiction is very similar to other chronic illnesses that hereditary, it is hereditary and it can run in families. And we know that 40 to 60% of a person's vulnerability to addiction does come from their genetics. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about super quickly is medicinal versus legalization versus decriminalization, and where does Pennsylvania stand? So as a collective group, is Pennsylvania a legalized state for marijuana?
It's legalized medicinally.
Yes, medicinally, which means you have to have a medical card in order to use marijuana. And even with that, there are a lot of rules and regulations as to where you can use, how to transport it, and all of those many things. When medicinal marijuana became, or medical marijuana became available in PA, there's a lot of people who just assumed that we legalized it across the board. I do some other education for those who were recently arrested for marijuana charges to help them get this charge off of their record. And I can tell you that the majority of them do not recognize the fact that it is still an illegal substance in the state of Pennsylvania. So we have not legalized it. That's not to say that it is not being pushed in that direction. It is definitely something that is being discussed to be put on the ballot, and it may have already been decided that it is something that we will be voting on very soon to legalize it. But every state is a little bit excuse me, is a little bit different. So yes, medicinally, we have the ability for people to address. And I think we're at about 26 different medical issues that you can use medicinal marijuana for. There is a process in which you need to, get that medical card, but it is not. The process is no longer as stringent as it once was, and we can get into that at some other point. Legalization, we're looking at 23 states, and I will show you those in just 1 minute, that have legalized marijuana, plus, so it's states plus Washington, D.C. The difference with that is Washington, D.C. has legalized it, but there is no, there's nowhere to buy it. So they've legalized it, but you can't purchase it yet. So it's kind of an oddity there. When it comes to decriminalization, that means, so as of right now in the state of Pennsylvania, if you have 30 grams of cannabis or marijuana on you, without intent to sell it, it can be 30 days in jail and up to a $500 fine. Decriminalization moves that down depending on the area to a very small or minimal fine, and it is not, there's no jail time with that. There are several locations in Pennsylvania that have decriminalized: Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Harrisburg, Erie, Stilton, York, State College, Lancaster, Upper Darby. They have decriminalized. There is also a place in Beaver County that has decriminalized. Does anyone know what that is? Where that is? Any thoughts?
Wait, can you repeat that?
There is a place in Beaver County that has decriminalized, a location in Beaver County that has decriminalized marijuana.
I don't know. Beaver Falls.
Very close, Chippewa Township. So they have decriminalized it. Yeah. And for them, the fine ranges between $200 to $300. Other locations, it's about 25 to 50. The biggest thing to keep in mind when it comes to decriminalization is if you are picked up by a local cop, which rules will that local cop follow?
Their jurisdiction.
Correct. If you are picked up by a state cop, which rules will the state cop follow?
The states.
The states. And has the state decriminalized marijuana? It has not. Okay, it is still an illegal substance. So it is really hard for a lot of people to recognize the fact that if you're picked up by a state police officer, they are going to follow the state laws. Okay, so these are the states that have at this point, like I said, there are 23 plus Washington, D.C. These are the effective dates. And just as an aside, we could get into it at a different point in time. There is a grassroots movement taking place in Colorado of people who were once for and helped to push through the legalization of marijuana that are now fighting back and really want to take a look at what they thought they were initially legalizing is not what is being sold and being used. And so they are looking at trying to revamp some of those things because of the high concentrate THC and the edibles and things like that. All right, so I am done. Are there any questions that you have for me that I can answer before you leave? And I'm sorry, like I said, if that was a little too basic for everybody, I apologize, but we wanted to start at the base.
That was very cool. Like I appreciate that information. I think that it's extraordinarily helpful.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that. If you come across any issues, Kim has my email address, but it is up here for anybody. I have my office number on there, but like really just call my cell phone. It's going to be the easiest way. I'm very rarely here. If you ever run into something and you have questions about it, please reach out and ask me. If I don't know the answer, I will connect you to someone who will. And we will, work together to get things figured out. But at any point, if you have questions, if you have staff that you would like to have this basic training, let me know. I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to provide whatever education you might need. And I know Kim and I will be working on some things to provide to your clients and client families in the upcoming future that can kind of maybe package this up in a small little trifold that we can give to you. So thank you for joining us today. I appreciate it very much. Kim, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Thank you very much, Kim. This is just what I was hoping for, just to get everyone on the same page so that we all have the same knowledge. Kim will be working with us in the upcoming grant years. She's going to help us, like she said, develop some informational material to pass out to participants and families. If you think of anything that you would like her to focus on, because I'd like her to continue to give us information and to educate us on what's going on out there. If there's anything specific you would like her to focus on, you could either email me or her, and we can have her do that in our next training.
Sounds great. Thank you all very much. I appreciate the back and forth.
Kim, will you send that link out to some of us who can send it to other staff then to watch this?
Yes, I will send
And
that.
then my second question, BCRC has gotten weird about training, and we have to have some type of proof that we did a training in order to put it in Relias. I ran into this with another one that I did. So can we get like even just an email that says thank you for attending?